Ambassador Kethter had been staring at the communication console for the better part of an hour, his four eyes blinking in different patterns as he tried to process what had just happened. The message had been sent. There was no taking it back now. "Status report," he called to his aide, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "The distress signal has been broadcast on all emergency frequencies, Ambassador. As per Galactic Council Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha, all member species within range are required to respond if capable." Kethter's primary eyes closed while his secondary ones continued monitoring the tactical display. The Zephyrian fleet had been decimated. 47 vessels reduced to twisted metal and vapor by the Corvan raiders in less than 6 standard hours. His people, peaceful traders for over 3 millennia, had no experience with warfare on this scale. "Sir," his aide's voice carried a note of confusion, "we're receiving acknowledgement signals from several species. The Altarians are dispatching a medical frigate. The Centauri Union is sending a diplomatic vessel to begin negotiations with the Corvan leadership. And the humans?" The aide's tentacles curled in what Kethter recognized as nervousness. They simply responded with message received. En route, no timeline, no details about what they're sending. Kethter felt his stomach's churn. In his panic, he had included humanity in the emergency broadcast. It had been an accident, really. The humans were barely 3 decades into galactic society, still considered newcomers by most species. They had been granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council more as a curiosity than anything else. Their small, unified planet was unremarkable compared to the vast trade federations and ancient civilizations that made up the Council. Most species viewed humans as harmless. They had no significant military presence, no vast fleets, no territory beyond their single solar system. Their representatives at council meetings were polite, asked reasonable questions, and generally kept to themselves. They had never been involved in any conflicts, never flexed any muscle, never given any indication they were anything more than another peaceful species learning to navigate galactic politics. "Perhaps they're sending a medical ship as well," Kethter murmured, more to himself than his aide. "Or maybe just a communication vessel to express condolences." The next 18 hours were a blur of emergency coordination. The Altarian medical ship arrived first, immediately beginning evacuation of the wounded from the 3 surviving Zephyrian vessels. The Centauri diplomatic vessel established a communication link with the Corvan fleet, though the raiders showed little interest in negotiation beyond demanding complete surrender and tribute. It was the censor operator who first detected them. "Ambassador," the young Zephyrian's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm picking up massive gravitational displacement on long-range sensors. Something big is coming out of hyperspace. The humans?" I think so, sir. The displacement signature is enormous. Whatever they sent, it's larger than anything in our databases." Kethter felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. Perhaps humanity had surprised him. Perhaps they had somehow acquired a large vessel from another species, maybe borrowed a dreadnought from one of the major powers. It would be unprecedented generosity for newcomers. But stranger things had happened. "Visual contact in 30 seconds, the sensor operator announced. The main display flickered to life, showing the empty space where hyperspace signatures indicated the human vessel would emerge. Kethter leaned forward in his command chair, his 4 eyes focused intently on the screen. The first ship that emerged from hyperspace was indeed massive. A sleek, angular vessel easily 3 times the length of the largest Zephyrian trader. Its hull was a matte gray that seemed to absorb light, covered in sensor arrays and weapon hardpoints that spoke of serious military engineering. "By the ancestors," Kethter breathed. "They sent a dreadnought." Then the second ship emerged. And the third. And the fourth. "Ambassador," the sensor operator's voice was barely a whisper, "there are more coming." The humans hadn't sent a ship. They had sent a fleet. Kethter watched in stunned silence as vessel after vessel materialized from hyperspace. Dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, carriers, destroyers, frigates, support ships, and classes of vessel he didn't recognize. The formation that took shape in the space near the Zephyrian survivors was larger than anything he had ever seen. It dwarfed the raiding fleet that had seemed so overwhelming just hours before. How many? Kethter asked. The sensor operator's hands shook as he worked his console. One count over 300 vessels, sir. And they're still coming. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Everyone stared at the display as more and more human ships emerged from hyperspace. The formation stretched across space like a metallic constellation, each vessel bristling with weapons and defensive systems that spoke of serious military capability. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're being hailed. It's the human fleet, on screen." The face that appeared on the main display was unremarkable by galactic standards. 2 eyes, no visible scales or carapace, pale skin stretched over bone in the typical mammalian configuration. But there was something in those eyes, a hardness that Kethter had never seen in the polite human diplomats who attended council meetings. "Ambassador Kethter, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. We received your distress call." "Admiral," Kethter managed, finding his voice. We are grateful for your response, but I fear there may have been some misunderstanding. The message was intended for species with significant military capabilities. "We didn't expect you asked for help," Admiral Chun interrupted, her voice calm but carrying an undertone that made Kethter's skin crawl. "We're here to provide it. But surely a force this size is unnecessary." The Corvan Raiders number perhaps 50 vessels. While they outgun us significantly, they're not a major military power. Admiral Chun's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Ambassador, you broadcast an emergency signal stating that your people were under attack by raiders who had destroyed 47 of your ships and were demanding surrender. You indicated that civilian populations were at risk." "Yes, that's correct. But then the force we've brought is exactly what's necessary." The communication ended, leaving Kethter staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew worked in stunned silence, trying to process what they were seeing on their sensors. "Ambassador," the sensor operator called out, "the human fleet is moving. They're surrounding the Corvan Raiders." Kethter turned back to the tactical display. The human fleet was indeed moving, but not in any formation he recognized from military textbooks. The vessels spread out in what seemed like a loose, almost casual arrangement, completely encircling the Corvan fleet. It looked less like a military maneuver and more like predators surrounding prey. "Get me a communication link to the Corvan command ship," Kethter ordered. "Perhaps we can warn them, give them a chance to withdraw." "Sir," his aide said carefully, "they've been demanding our surrender for the past day. They destroyed 47 of our ships without provocation. Why would you want to warn them?" Kethter looked at the massive human fleet on his display, then at the much smaller Corvan raider force that had terrorized his people with such ease just hours before. "Because I'm beginning to suspect that what's about to happen to them will make their attack on us look like a minor disagreement." The communication with the Corvan command ship was brief and predictably hostile. The raiders had noticed the human fleet, of course, but seemed more annoyed than concerned. Their commander, a scarred Corvan named Brazek, dismissed the humans as untested weaklings and suggested that Kethter had called in children to fight an adult war. "These soft mammals have never seen real combat," Brazek snarled over the com. "Their pretty ships will burn just as easily as yours did." "Perhaps," Kethter replied carefully, "you might consider withdrawing. The humans have sent a very large force." Brazek's laugh was harsh. "Large? Numbers mean nothing if you don't know how to use them. These humans will scatter the moment we open fire." The communication ended, and Kethter settled back in his chair to wait. He didn't have to wait long. "Ambassador," the communications officer announced, "the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. I think they're addressing the Corvan fleet. Let's hear it." Admiral Chun's voice filled the bridge, calm and professional. "Corvan vessels, this is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. You are ordered to cease all hostile activities immediately and withdraw from this system. You have attacked vessels under the protection of the Galactic Council and threatened civilian populations. This is your only warning. The response from the Korvan fleet was immediate and predictable. Weapons fire erupted from their vessels. Concentrated volleys of plasma and particle beams directed at the nearest human ships. What happened next would be discussed in military academies for generations to come. The human vessels didn't scatter. They didn't retreat. They didn't even return fire immediately. Instead, they simply absorbed the attack. Energy screens flared to life around the human ships, deflecting the Korvan weapons with such casual efficiency that it almost looked choreographed. Then, after letting the Korvan fleet exhale, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 18 hours after the human fleet's arrival in the Zephyrian system. Ambassador Kethter found himself at the center of attention in a way that made his exoskeleton itch with nervous energy. Representatives from 43 species filled the great chamber, and every conversation seemed to revolve around the same topic: humanity's unexpected military capability. 374 vessels. Councillor Vexani of the Altarian Federation was saying, her crystalline voice carrying across the chamber. Our intelligence networks had no indication that humanity possessed such a fleet. That's because we weren't looking, admitted General Tharks of the Korvan Military Authority, his scarred features grim. Humanity seemed inconsequential, a minor species with limited territory and no apparent ambitions. Kethter watched the debate with growing unease. Around him, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were trying to understand what the human fleet meant for the balance of power that had existed for millennia. Some were calling for immediate diplomatic overtures. Others suggested economic sanctions. A few of the more paranoid species were already discussing defensive alliances. The question, interrupted Councillor Morath of the Hegemony Core Worlds, is not what we didn't know about human military capabilities. The question is what they intend to do with them. They could have conquered half the Outer Rim by now, pointed out Trade Minister Zelktha. Instead, they've been attending council meetings and filing trade requests in triplicate. Perhaps that was the plan all along, suggested Representative Quillen of the Nexus States. Appear harmless while building a fleet, then strike when no one expects it. Kethter had remained silent throughout most of the debate, but this accusation finally moved him to speak. With respect, Representative Quillen, if humanity intended conquest, they've had 3 decades of opportunity. Their behavior suggests the opposite. Oh? Quillen's 6 eyes focused on Kethter with obvious skepticism. And what behavior would that be? They saved us, Kethter said simply. We called for help, and they came. Not with a single ship or a token force, but with everything necessary to ensure the job was done completely. Exactly. Quillen's voice rose. Don't you see? It's the scope of their response that's concerning. They brought enough firepower to level a planet to deal with a simple raiding party. What does that suggest about their intentions? Before Kethter could respond, the chamber's communication system activated. The familiar 2-tone chime that indicated an incoming message from outside council space filled the room, and the central holodisplay flickered to life. Admiral Chun's face appeared before the assembled council, and Kethter noticed that conversations died throughout the chamber. Even transmitted through holography, the human admiral projected an aura of competence and control that was difficult to ignore. Honored counselors, Admiral Chun began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. I understand there have been questions about humanity's recent actions in the Zephyrian system. I've been authorized by the United Earth government to address your concerns directly. Councillor Morath activated his speaking privileges. Admiral Chun, this council demands an explanation for humanity's undisclosed military capabilities. The presence of such a fleet represents a potential threat to galactic stability. I understand your concern, Counselor. However, I must respectfully correct your assumption. Humanity has never concealed our defensive capabilities. We simply haven't advertised them. Defensive capabilities? Representative Quillen's voice dripped with disbelief. Admiral, your fleet outnumbers the standing forces of most Council member species. That's not defense, that's overwhelming offensive capacity. Admiral Chun's expression remained calm. Representative Quillen, I believe you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about human military doctrine. Perhaps a demonstration would be helpful. The display shifted, showing what appeared to be a tactical readout of local space around the council chambers. Kethter could see the positions of various council member fleets, trade vessels, and defensive installations. Everything looked normal until small icons began appearing throughout the display. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. These icons represent human vessels currently within detection range of your long-range sensors, Admiral Chun explained conversationally. The fleet that responded to the Zephyrian distress call represents approximately 12% of humanity's total naval assets. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. Kethter felt his stomach drop as the implications sank in. If what Admiral Chun was showing them was accurate, humanity possessed the largest military force in known space. By a significant margin? This is impossible, General Tharks declared. Our intelligence networks would have detected construction on this scale. General, your intelligence networks have been watching our outer colonies and trade stations. They haven't been watching our outer system asteroid mining operations, our deep space construction facilities, or our exploration fleets operating beyond known trade routes. Councillor Vexani, as crystalline form, shimmered with agitation. Admiral, if humanity possesses military force on this scale, why maintain the pretense of being a minor species? Why not claim the influence that such power would normally command? For the first time since the conversation began, Admiral Chun's professional composure seemed to crack slightly. Something that might have been amusement flickered across her features. Councillor Vexani, with respect, influence gained through military intimidation is not the kind of influence humanity desires. We prefer to earn our place through contribution, cooperation, and mutual benefit. But surely, pressed Trade Minister Zelktha, you understand that military strength translates directly to political power. With the force levels you're describing, humanity could demand significant concessions from this council. We could, Admiral Chun agreed. But we won't. Counselor, let me explain something about human nature. We build large militaries not because we want to use them, but because we want to ensure we never have to use them. The goal of human military doctrine is to make warfare so costly for potential aggressors that they choose peace instead. Representative Quillen activated his speaking privileges again. Admiral, that's all very noble, but it doesn't address the fundamental question. What are humanity's intentions now that your capabilities are known? Our intentions, Admiral Chun replied, are exactly what they've always been. To trade peacefully, to contribute to galactic civilization, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Protect? General Tharks leaned forward in his chair. Admiral, the Galactic Council maintains peacekeeping forces for exactly that purpose. We don't need humanity's protection. Admiral Chun's expression grew serious. General, with all due respect, where were those peacekeeping forces when the Zephyrians called for help? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Kethter felt every eye in the chamber turned toward him. And he realized that Admiral Chun had just highlighted a fundamental weakness in the Council's response protocols. The Council's peacekeeping forces were engaged in other operations, General Tharks said defensively. The response to the Zephyrian situation was proceeding according to established protocols. Which protocols would those be? Admiral Chun asked with dangerous politeness. The ones that resulted in a medical frigate and a diplomatic vessel being sent to deal with an active raiding fleet? General, by the time your protocols would have resulted in meaningful military assistance, the Zephyrian species would have been extinct. The brutal accuracy of that assessment sent a chill through the chamber. Kethter knew it was true. If the humans hadn't responded, his people would have faced a choice between slavery and annihilation. Admiral, Councillor Moroth interjected, while we appreciate humanity's assistance in this instance, you must understand that the existence of your fleet creates ... complications. The balance of power that has maintained galactic peace for over 2 millennia is at risk. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. I understand your concern, Counselor. Let me address it directly. Humanity has no territorial ambitions beyond our current borders. We have no interest in controlling trade routes, imposing governments on other species, or expanding our influence through military force. Our fleet exists for one purpose: to ensure that no species faces extinction because help arrived too late. That's a significant responsibility to claim, observed Ambassador Colfin of the Rim Territories. What gives humanity the right to make such decisions? For the first time in the conversation, Admiral Chun's composure cracked entirely. Her eyes hardened, and when she spoke, her voice carried an edge that made several council members lean back in their chairs. Ambassador Colfin, what gave the Corven Raiders the right to destroy 47 Zephyrian vessels? What gives pirates the right to terrorize trade convoys? What gives any aggressor the right to threaten civilians? The chamber fell silent. The answer, Admiral Chun continued, is nothing. Nothing gives them that right. But someone has to have the capability to tell them no and make it stick. For too long, this council has relied on diplomacy and economic pressure to maintain peace. Those are excellent tools when dealing with rational actors operating in good faith. 6 months after the Zephyrian incident, Ambassador Kethter found himself in the strangest diplomatic meeting of his career. The location alone was unprecedented, the bridge of the human vessel Determination, flagship of what the galactic media had begun calling the Protection Fleet. Across from him sat Admiral Chun, looking exactly as composed as she had during that first emergency response. But the woman beside her was someone Kethter had never expected to meet in person. Secretary of Interspecies Relations Maria Santos, the highest-ranking civilian official in humanity's Galactic Affairs Department. Ambassador, Secretary Santos began, we appreciate you accepting our invitation to this meeting. We understand it's somewhat irregular. Secretary Santos, after the past 6 months, I think we can all agree that regular no longer applies to human-council relations. Admiral Chun leaned forward slightly. Ambassador, we asked you here because the Zephyrian situation was the first time humanity revealed our capabilities to the broader galaxy. You've had time to observe the consequences. We'd value your perspective on how things have developed. Kethter considered the question carefully. The past 6 months had indeed been transformative, though not in the ways most council members had feared. Admiral, I'll be direct. When humanity first revealed the scope of your fleet, many council members expected ... complications, territorial disputes, demands for political concessions, the typical behavior of a newly emerged major power. And none of that happened. Instead, we've seen something unprecedented in galactic history. Secretary Santos raised an eyebrow. How so? Kethter activated the holodisplay at the center of the room, showing a map of local galactic space. In the 6 months since humanity announced your protection protocols, piracy incidents in council space have dropped by 73%. Raiding attacks on civilian populations are down by 81%. Trade route security has improved to levels we haven't seen in centuries. The map shifted, highlighting specific sectors. More importantly, we've seen the emergence of what economists are calling confidence zones around human patrol routes. Species that have lived in fear for generations are suddenly expanding their trade networks, establishing new colonies, and engaging in long-term projects. Admiral Chun nodded. Our patrol schedules are public information. Anyone can see where our ships will be operating. Exactly. And that predictability has created something remarkable. Actual galactic peace, not just the absence of major wars. Secretary Santos leaned back in her chair. Ambassador, I have to ask, how has the Council responded to these developments? We know there was significant debate after our initial revelation. Kethter's exoskeleton itched with what humans might have recognized as embarrassment. Secretary, the Council's response has been educational for the first 3 months. There was considerable discussion about unilateral action and disruption of established protocols. And now? Now, most council members are quietly adjusting their own policies to align with human operations. No one wants to be seen as opposing initiatives that are clearly improving galactic stability. The display shifted again, showing incident reports from across council space. Admiral, you asked for my perspective. Here it is. Humanity has accomplished in 6 months what the council has been trying to achieve for millennia. You've made aggression genuinely costly. Admiral Chun studied the data. Ambassador, we didn't do this alone. The improvement in galactic security is as much about deterrence as actual intervention. Most potential aggressors choose to find legal alternatives rather than risk facing our response. Which brings me to the real purpose of this meeting, Secretary Santos interjected. Ambassador, humanity's protection protocols have been successful beyond our initial projections. But success brings its own challenges. Kethter felt his primary eyes focus intently on the Secretary. What kind of challenges? Secretary Santos activated a different display, showing a complex chart of communication frequencies and response times. We're currently receiving an average of 47 requests for assistance per day. Everything from pirate attacks to territorial disputes to natural disasters. Our fleet is large, but it's not infinite. And we need to make some decisions about priorities and resource allocation. More importantly, we need to decide whether humanity continues to act unilaterally or whether we begin working more closely with existing galactic institutions. The implications hit Kethter immediately. You're considering integration with Council peacekeeping forces? Admiral Chun nodded. We're considering several options. Direct integration is one possibility. Another is a formal alliance structure that maintains human, operational independence while coordinating with Council objectives. A third option is the establishment of a new multinational peacekeeping organization with human forces as the primary military component. What would such arrangements require from the Council? Secretary Santos' expression grew serious. Fundamental reforms. The Council's current approach to peacekeeping is built around negotiation and compromise. Those are valuable tools, but they're not sufficient for dealing with actors who view negotiation as weakness. You're talking about changing the basic philosophy of galactic governance. We're talking about making galactic governance effective. Admiral Chin corrected. The current system works well for managing disagreements between civilized species. It fails completely when dealing with those who choose to operate outside civilized norms. Kethter was quiet for several moments, processing the implications. What you're proposing would represent the most significant change in galactic politics since the founding of the Council. Yes, Secretary Santos agreed. It would, and if the Council refuses these reforms? Then humanity continues operating independently, Admiral Chun said simply. We'll coordinate when possible, but we won't allow Council politics to prevent us from protecting those who need protection. The meeting was interrupted by the ship's communication system. Admiral, came a voice from the bridge, we're receiving a priority distress signal from the Antares sector. Multiple vessels under attack by unknown aggressors. Admiral Chun stood immediately. Excuse me, Ambassador. Duty calls. Kethter watched as the Admiral moved to her command station, issuing orders with the same calm efficiency he'd witnessed during the Zephyrian crisis. Within minutes, a human response fleet was moving toward the Antares sector, while diplomatic channels opened to notify relevant Council authorities of the situation. Secretary Santos, Kethter said quietly, may I observe your fleet's response protocols? Of course. In fact, I'd welcome your perspective. For the next 4 hours, Kethter watched humanity's protection fleet in action. The response was everything he had come to expect, swift, overwhelming, and precisely calibrated to the threat level. The aggressors in the Antares sector turned out to be a previously unknown raider group that had been systematically attacking isolated mining operations. The human response was methodical. First, civilian evacuations were coordinated while the fleet moved into position. Then, The raiders were given a single ultimatum: withdraw immediately or face elimination. When the raiders chose to fight, the engagement lasted exactly 7 minutes, but what impressed Kethter most wasn't the military efficiency. It was what happened afterward. "Admiral," he said as the fleet began recovery operations, "your people are rendering aid to the raiders wounded." "Of course," Admiral Chun replied, as if the question surprised her. "They're no longer a threat. Basic humanitarian protocols apply, even though they were attacking civilians just hours ago." "Ambassador, humanity doesn't believe in revenge. We believe in stopping threats and then helping everyone rebuild. Those raiders will be processed according to galactic law, but they'll receive proper medical care and legal representation." Secretary Santos joined the conversation. "Ambassador, this is what we mean about fundamental philosophical differences. The Council's approach often focuses on punishing wrongdoing. Humanity's approach focuses on preventing it from happening again." Kefter watched human medics working alongside captured raiders, providing the same quality of care they gave to rescued miners. "Secretary, in all my years as a diplomat, I've never seen a military force that treated defeated enemies with such consideration." "It's not consideration," Admiral Chun said. "It's practicality. Dead enemies can't change their behavior. Humiliated enemies often seek revenge. But enemies who are treated with basic dignity after defeat sometimes become allies." "Is that what you're hoping for with the raiders?" "We're hoping they'll choose legal alternatives to raiding. Some will, some won't. But the ones who do will remember that humanity gave them that choice." As they returned to human space, Kethter found himself thinking about everything he had witnessed. The conversation resumed in Admiral Chun's ready room, where Secretary Santos had prepared a comprehensive briefing on humanity's long-term vision for galactic security. "Ambassador," she began, "I want to be clear about humanity's goals. We're not seeking to replace the Council or establish ourselves as galactic rulers. We're seeking to create a galaxy where smaller species don't have to choose between survival and freedom." "And you believe the current system prevents that?" "I know it does," Admiral Chun said bluntly. "The current system creates a